Coming up, the ICT Newscast hits the road for our special election night coverage. We'll check in with Gabriella Cázares-Kelly, the Pima County recorder who has been busy administering early voting in Arizona. Plus, a Navajo citizen is doing his part to bring water to his nation. And more from visual artist Keith BraveHeart. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Go'atsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start our newscast in Egypt, where world leaders are coming together once again to talk about the issue that affects us all. The United Nations is hosting its annual climate talk, nicknamed COP27. The gathering brings together diplomats, scientists, and activists, all in hopes of creating policy to slow down the warming of our planet. This comes as geopolitical tiles have shifted through a devastating war in Ukraine and as energy and food prices have skyrocketed across the globe. Experts weighed in on what to expect from the two-week event.
This COP as well is going to focus quite a lot on loss and damage, and so those are the costs caused by climate change, particularly to lower-income countries that are not responsible for climate change, but that are increasingly bearing the brunt of climate change.
Since last year's gathering, just 26 of the 193 countries that agreed to step up their climate actions have followed through with their plans, according to reporting by the New York Times. Indigenous leaders from around the globe are in attendance, including a cohort from Indian Collective. Now to Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to weigh in on a fight for water on the Navajo Nation. On Friday, the High Court announced it will decide whether the government has a duty to address Navajo's right to access water from the Colorado River. The justices will hear appeals from several stakeholders, including the federal government, as well as the states of Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and several California water districts. The tribe's land base, the largest Native American territory, is mostly in Arizona, but also crosses into New Mexico and Utah. In a Ninth Circuit Court ruling last year, the Navajo Nation argued that the government illegally blocked efforts to determine its Colorado River water rights. The Supreme Court also announced that oral arguments in the litigation will last 1 hour. Well, you may have noticed this new space. We're here in San Bernardino, California, to bring you a special newscast. Our live coverage for the 2022 midterm election starts on November 8th from 7 to 10 p.m. Pacific time. ICT has partnered with FNX First Nations Experience to bring you 3 hours of coverage to track the 11 Indigenous candidates running for the U.S. Congress and other seats. We've brought together a crew of people to make this show come to life. Our newscast will feature interviews with candidates themselves, updates from correspondents based in states like North Carolina and Montana. We'll have lively conversations with political pundits and visit some watch parties. The 2022 midterms are setting up to have wide repercussions for Indigenous nations and people, with the potential for current members of Congress to lose their seats and maybe even pick up a few. Be sure to tune in on this channel or by visiting ICT and FNX's Facebook or YouTube pages on Tuesday to watch our special coverage. We'll be right back. Certain places in Arizona were reporting instances of voters feeling intimidated when dropping their ballots off at the drop box locations last week. Those reports came about 110 miles away from Pima County, where Gabriella Cázares-Kelly is the county recorder. Part of her job is to administer early voting and mailing out absentee ballots. The Tohono O'odham Nation citizen is the first Native person to ever hold this position in Pima County. I interviewed her last week about the topic. Are you witnessing any kinds of voter intimidation in your county?
Here in Pima County, we are not seeing any of this. We do not have ballot drop boxes that are unstaffed. We do have early voting sites. However, at all of our early voting sites, we have been reporting nothing but satisfied, excited, determined voters. That isn't an issue here in this county, but I will say we are feeling the impact of that. We have had more people calling our office to ask about safety. We have people making comments at the early voting sites about militia groups. It is definitely something that we're feeling, even though it hasn't impacted here exactly.
This, of course, is your first midterm election since being elected to the Pima County Recorder's Office. Maybe talk about what you've been experiencing. I mean, none of us have any experience rolling out voting for thousands of people, so I'm really curious what your experience has been like.
Well, first of all, this has been a dream job for me. I first got involved with this office as a whole simply because I was working at a tribal community college and wanted to register students, and were having a really hard time with issues particular to Native communities. When I would even ask a voter, are you registered to vote? They would often say for tribal elections or for like the president. So not knowing the difference, and every single interaction required a civics lesson. And so taking that and recognizing that, we push so hard for people to vote, but oftentimes we don't recognize the systemic barriers that are in place to even get them to register to vote. So the primary function of this office is voter registration. We are maintaining the voter rolls. And it's very complex and requires a lot of education because every single person is different. Every single person has different identification, different cards, different situations. We've gotten a lot of calls from truckers this week. Where do they register to vote? They're on the road the majority of the time. They sleep in their truck. What happens for somebody like that who wants to participate?
We heard in an earlier newscast this week about a proposition in Arizona that voters are actually voting on that essentially, based on our understanding, would make it harder for Native people to vote with tribal IDs. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. So this has been an ongoing issue. Here in Arizona, we have 22 distinct tribal nations. We have a really high population of Native people here in this state, and we still have Arizona legislators who don't understand what a tribal ID is or the need for a tribal ID in the communities that we are serving. The Tohono O'odham Nation, the largest reservation in my county, the reservation is the size of Connecticut, and there is no motor vehicle division anywhere close by. So for anybody who is needing a driver's license, it's a 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive one way. And that's if their family has a family vehicle. A tribal ID is something that would be available within their own community. It is something that is heavily regulated within the community, and it should be something that shows who they are and that they are a citizen of this nation as one of the first peoples of this nation. But it is not listed as a primary form of identification, it's only listed as a secondary. The other issue has been the difficulty of registering or online services are only limited to people with driver's licenses. So connectivity issues or non-standard addresses. It goes on and on and on. But what this proposition is asking is for either that driver's license number or someone's social security number. We have problems with people simply wanting to put their phone number on the envelope in case we have a question. People are very concerned about their privacy. To have them ask to put their birth date or their social security card number or any of those things is such a violation of their privacy, and it doesn't add anything meaningful to the security of the verification process. So it's not helpful for the voter, and it deters more people from participating.
Speaking about encouraging voters to show up at the polls or to drop off their, absentee ballot, if there was a voter here who needed a little bit of a push, what would you say to them in terms of getting out there on November 8th?
I would always share, there's a lot of people who can't vote, especially in the Native community. We have people who have struggled with identification issues. But we ourselves in Arizona, we haven't had the right to vote until 1948. We didn't have the freedom to freely participate until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we didn't have language protections for Inhuribat, who Bismash Kamirganyok, for somebody like my grandmother who didn't speak English until the mid-1970s. And so when we think about the starting line of who can participate and who can't, we have to recognize that we have to start, our starting line is much further than others. And the very first thing we can do is to show up and to see what the process looks like, to encourage our family members to show up, to talk with one another. That's our strength as people, to let people know what they can expect. And make sure that you get out there, because there's a lot of our brothers and sisters, our relatives who are not able, because of incarceration, because of identification, because of a million other things, who can't participate. So if voting it's not the most important thing you can do, I like to tell people it's the least that you can do if you have the right. And then we need you to get involved.
Well, Gabriella Cázares-Kelly, we know you're incredibly busy, so thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Of course, thank you.
ICT's McKenzie Allen-Charmley first interviewed Stanford student and graphic designer Jaden Redhair in 2021. The Navajo Nation citizen collaborated with water bottle maker Nalgene in hopes of raising money for the water crisis on his tribal lands. Here's part of a mini documentary from McKenzie.
I don't know. This is the bottle that I created in collaboration with Nalgene. I knew that I wanted the bottle to say Tohono O'odham Nation, which means water is life. After a few iterations, it came to be this bottle, the shape of the Navajo Nation, the land that it encompasses, also the Monument Valley inside of it with the ceremonial basket and also the words that tell you exactly what it's talking about. I've really enjoyed that a lot of people are buying the bottle. It makes me very happy that it's created such a change. And for me, graphic design is something I like to do all the time. And I was able to use that in order to create funds for the Navajo Nation. And now that I'm able to do that as a Stanford student doing engineering, it's really cool to see that just one of the things I love to do, creating that much of a change. When I think about the many different problems the Navajo Nation has, looking into the water crisis, it really makes me think wow, there's a lot of solutions here. To see a lot of that change come to the Navajo Nation, a lot of the indigenous youth to go back and to really help that. A lot of organizations on in the United States need to work more with indigenous people to see which ways would actually benefit the land the most, just because we're the original caretakers of it.
Flash forward more than a year and Jaden has a new project with the company. Take a look.
Hi, Jaden. It's so great to talk to you today about your second water bottle that you've made a graphic design for and worked with Nalgene on. That bottle had raised over $80,000, your first one, but now you've made a second. Can you tell our audiences how you got involved with Nalgene and how this second bottle came to be?
So I originally partnered with Nalgene to create a first water bottle. Nalgene wanted to reach out to donate to the Navajo Nation, so they found a nonprofit on the Navajo Nation called COPE, Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment, and they're the ones that connected me with Nalgene to be the graphic designer for the water bottle. And after hearing, what they want to do by donating the money to increase water accessibility on the Navajo Nation, I thought, hey, that sounds like a really good thing. I'd be glad to help in any way that I can. So I made the first bottle, and because the first bottle made about $80,000 from the Navajo Nation, they wanted to do a second iteration. So then we went back and then developed the second water bottle.
So for our audience members who are unaware how impactful a water crisis can be and what a water crisis is, can you explain what's going on in the Navajo Nation in regards to that?
Yeah, so on the Navajo Nation, there's people that live in very rural communities where they don't have access to running water. It's either too expensive or it's just very difficult to get running water out to them. So oftentimes, they take trucks and they haul water from water refill stations. So they're hauling, almost every day for the most part for some people. And through there, some of this money that's going into it to also create more, water fill stations, as well as getting some people better access to water, because sometimes they have to drive more than an hour away just to get water they use for cooking, for drinking, and just things like that.
And how did you come up with the design for the new water bottle?
Yeah, so for the new bottle, I actually went out to take photos at night, astrophotography, a while back, and I had a picture of the Milky Way across one of our lakes, which is Acai Lake in New Mexico. And, I just love that picture. And, looking back on the designs, I was like, hey, why don't I try using that picture in, the bottle? And sure enough, I did. And that's how, I guess, the whole idea of the stars in the lake came to shine in the bottle. So yeah, that's the story behind it.
How does it make you feel to have such a positive impact on the Navajo Nation, especially given you're from there?
It was really good, just because I didn't know it was going to get this much traction that it did. It also feels very natural for me, just because it seems like it's giving back to the community. It just seems something that I should do. It just seems not so much like an obligation; it's more of a responsibility on my end. So I thought that was very important for myself to do, and I'm glad that it's able to actually help. I still can't believe it made so much money, to be honest, just because I just never thought it would get that big, and I'm pretty happy that it has. And I think the time that it kind of hit me when it was a big deal was when people were sending me photos of the bottle all over the United States, and I even had the water bottle taking a picture in Japan, of all places, and it's super crazy to see it go basically pretty much worldwide. And it's just an amazing experience, and I'm glad to be helping the Navajo Nation in some way while I'm still in school.
And what advice would you give other change makers like yourself who want to make an impact, or are maybe unsure, or they're facing difficulties? What advice would you give them to keep going?
I know there's going to be very difficult. There's going to be people that might put you down or say you should be doing something different instead. But I would just say just to keep going and to keep helping. But for the most part, also take care of yourself, because I believe that taking care of yourself first is very important, so that you can better help help other people. So yeah, that's what I would say to inspiring people that are wanting to do this type of work.
Jaden, thank you so much for joining us.
Depicting contemporary Native American life is what Keith BraveHeart does best. He's a professor at Oglala Lakota College, where he's lived most of his life. He's also a filmmaker and a guest curator for the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. ICT's Shirley Snavy interviewed him at Racing Magpie in Rapid City, South Dakota.
I never really had an aspiration to be an artist as a youth, but I think it's just kind of at that turning point whenever I had to graduate from high school. I was like, what's next? So I was lucky to find out of the Oscar House Summer Art Institute, which is like an art camp for 2 weeks at the University of South Dakota. And when I arrived there, and it was all based off of my I guess talent that was becoming visible to my instructors in grade school, my teachers in grade school. But when I got to the Oscar House Summer Art Institute, I found more about this just vast world that existed when it came to Native arts. And so it really made me decide then that I wanted to pursue that journey. And it had to begin with education as well too. So the instructors I had at that art camp also notified me about art programs out there, and particularly the Institute of American Indian Arts, which was one of the leading, if not at the time, probably the only one that was really for Native students. I know there's programs in our state, but that was the one that was encouraged the most because of its legacy as well too, with all the different artists who've gone through there. So I applied and I got in, and once I was there, then I kind of realized like this is the path that I should be on. And so it just became so overwhelming in a good way, where discovering all these great artists, like I was talking about Austin Rave, finding him amongst the great names like T.C. Cannon and Alfred Youngman and all these different artists who kind of established like a very milestone in our continuum of Native arts. That kept motivating me and pushing me to want to keep just at it. And then of course all my friends who were there with me as well too, we kind of helped motivate each other to just keep with it, in a good competitive way. We always want to do your best. So that just has stuck with me, in light of any other challenge or obstacle that could occur in lifestyle. I just always remain dedicated to being an artist, And I think you have to have a love and appreciation to just want to be around art. You want to view art, you want to engage with art, you want to communicate with art, much more than you just probably want to make it for yourself. So I think just having these values as a Native person, as a Lakota person, kind of helped me to not feel selfish in a way, like I had to go out and always be the one that was demanding attention. Whenever I made art, it had to be it was all about my work, I have more appreciation and fun when I get to visit with the artists that I look up to. So I always say that I'm a viewer of art before I'm an artist as well too. So I think that's kind of one of the things that pulls me away from making so much art myself, because I'd rather support others before I kind of support myself. But I'm getting to that age where I'm gonna start to be very selective and make hard no's and say I have to kind of start getting the rest of these years out of my life that I need to make art as well too. It was untitled, but then in parentheses I kind of had a little humor, and I put Watecha Shni, meaning no leftovers. It was just a sincere painting that I did, and it's actually my auntie, my eldest auntie. She's the oldest out of my grandmother's children. Her name's Mercy Iron Crow, and the little girl that's there, that's her great-granddaughter. And that story is pretty tragic for that little for both of them, because my cousin, her name was Crystal Redhair, she passed away, and she had a daughter who was young, who would have been my niece, and that was the mother of that little girl in that painting. But she also passed away as well too. And these were tragic deaths that are kind of common, in a sad way amongst our communities. So instead of kind of focusing on that part of our story, I wanted to uplift my relatives, but I also wanted to really show my auntie that I cherish her. She's become the matriarch after our grandmother passed away, and she's also really active in that role of being a grandmother, because she took that little one who didn't have her own mother or her grandmother, and she's raised her since she was a little girl, and you can see how just a big impact it had on that little girl's life, because she understands Lakota language. Because my auntie is one of the last fluent speakers, so you can tell that little one's really gaining the benefits of growing up in that household. So I wanted to paint them just because I felt like they really had a really nice story, but also just a interesting visual as well. And as a contemporary artist, I always like to kind of play with these contrasts of our different kind of cultural spheres. So thinking of Native peoples, how they are, a lot of the things we do in our culture are based around food. You know, we have feasts. It's very central to like just our community and our society. So seeing these two Native individuals in front of this buffet, Golden Corral, but also a visible landmark here in Rapid City, I felt like that would be something that would bring people in at first glance. Like they're familiar with what that looks like, but when they come in, they see things that are really sincere and authentic.
That was visual artist Keith BraveHeart. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.